Prior to the war, the German army was heavily engaged in expanding its new Panzer Divisions. For this purpose, great attention was given to the development of new types of tanks. Due to the German industry's lack of production capacity at that time, and despite great effort, the more desirable and stronger Panzer III and Panzer IV could not be produced in sufficient numbers. The Germans were instead forced to use a large number of the weakly armed Panzer I and Panzer IIs. Luckily for the Germans, during the takeover of Czechoslovakia in early 1939, they came into possession of the Škoda and ČKD factories. With them, they obtained over 200 LT VZ-35s and, more importantly, some 150 LT VZ-38. While both would be put into service, the Germans were far more interested in the more advanced LT VZ-38, which was far superior to the German Panzer I and Panzer II, and was a close match for the larger Panzer IIIs. The LT VZ-38 would provide a great asset for the German Panzer Divisions during the first few years of the war. In later years, its chassis would be reused for a number of different modifications, up to the war's end. Welcome to a new Tank Encyclopedia voiced article. If you like the kind of videos and articles we do here at Tank Encyclopedia, maybe consider joining our staff. We are always looking for more writers, illustrators, narrators, video and audio editors, and far more. Join an amazing team and help us share the history of armored fighting vehicles. After the collapse of the Austro-Hungarian monarchy, Czechoslovakia became an independent state. Besides its independence, it also inherited two military weapon manufacturers, Škoda and ČKD. ČKD was formed back in 1871 and was initially involved in production of industrial machinery, while in later years it would begin to develop and produce military equipment like field kitchens, automobiles, tractors, etc. During the First World War, ČKD was even involved in producing a small run of armored cars for the Austro-Hungarian army. With the dissolution of the monarchy for over a decade, ČKD did nothing regarding the development of armored vehicles. The first attempts to expand to production of armored vehicles were made during the 20s. These included two projects, the MT tracked tractor based on the French FT tank, and the Kolohosenka, a wheel-cum-track vehicle, but nothing came of these two projects. Recognizing the obvious lack of experience in tracked vehicle design, ČKD officials bought a British Carden Loyd Mark VI tank kit. After a series of tests and evaluations, ČKD produced its own tank kit based on this vehicle and even gained a small production order from the Czechoslovakian army. However, the greatest success of this project was the gaining of experience in tank design. In the mid-30s, ČKD, under the leadership of Alexej Surin, began working on a completely new and quite modern tank design. Plans and blueprints for the AH-IV tank kits and TNH light tank were ready early in 1935. Both vehicles were to use a new design of suspension which consisted of two larger road wheels placed on a single horizontal spring unit. As at that time Czechoslovakia was in no position to finance nor maintain a large army, ČKD turned instead to the foreign market. The first business opportunity was quick to arrive. Luckily for ČKD, a military delegation from Iran was visiting Czechoslovakia on a military mission of finding good tank designs. This delegation, led by General Ismail Khan, arrived in Prague during May 1935. Once there, they met with the representatives from Škoda and ČKD. The ČKD paper designs impressed the Iranian delegation, which immediately ordered 30 AH-IVs armed with machine guns and TNH armed with 3.7 cm guns and 2 machine guns. The ČKD officials were quite generous to the Iranian delegation, giving them a P-1 tank kit as a present. These two prototypes were ready by September 1935. The Iranian delegation was once again impressed and increased the order for 50 vehicles of both types. Immediately after these negotiations, ČKD began working to finish its TNH vehicle, which lasted to the end of 1935. Due to some delays, ČKD finally delivered these vehicles in May 1937. Following this success, ČKD managed to achieve great export success with these two vehicles. The TNH with different weapon configurations would be sold to Iraq, Latvia, Peru, and Switzerland. During the late 30s, encouraged by the export success, ČKD officials tried to sell the TNH to the Czechoslovakian army. Previously, ČKD had been included in the production of nearly half of the 298 Škoda LTVZ-35 tanks for the Czechoslovakian army. ČKD got its chance when the army decided not to increase the production of the LTVZ-35 and instead asked for a new design. The ČKD response for the Czechoslovakian army request was the TNH-S tank. This vehicle was built in 1937 by using soft iron plates to save money. While visually the same as the standard TNH, the TNH-S tank had a stronger engine and a new gearbox unit. At the start of 1938, the TNH-S and another prototype, named P-2-R, were presented to the army. After a series of extensive tests that lasted until March, the army requested tests of the installation of the LTVZ-35 turret with a new 3.7cm A7 gun. In April, the army made several new requests regarding the design of the driver's frontal armored plate, which had to be changed in order to provide more room for the machine gun to be operated efficiently, increasing the armor thickness of the front plate to 25mm, increasing the fuel load from 180 to 210 liters, and adding a two-part hatch door above the radio operator. After more months spent in weapon testing, the TNH-S was once again presented to the Army's military delegation at the start of July. The delegation was impressed with its performance and ordered it into production under the designation LTVZ-38. The tank was then returned for a complete overhaul, but despite the 7,740 km long test run, only minor repairs were needed. Despite providing an excellent overall performance, the start of LTVZ-38 production was delayed. The main reason for this was a disagreement between the army and ČKD officials regarding the tank's price. The price for the LTVZ-38 was 640,000 crowns, which was far more than the older LTVZ-35. As both sides reached a compromise, a contract for 150 vehicles was signed in late July 1938. It was planned to produce the first 20 vehicles by the end of the year. The remaining tanks were to be built in early 1939. The vehicles were to be built in the ČKD production facilities in Prague-Liben. Praga was to provide the engines and most parts of the gearboxes, while armor plates were provided by Poldi Steel Mills and VHHT. Czechoslovakia's attempts to reorganize and expand its army were never completed due to the political developments with Germany. Namely, due to the Munich Agreement in September 1938, Germany managed to obtain a large portion of Czechoslovakia's western territory. During this crisis, ČKD received permission from the army to advertise this vehicle abroad. Britain was interested in its design and, in February 1939, one was actually shipped to England to be tested at the Mechanical Experiment Establishment of the British Army. The British were not impressed with its performance. After this failure, the vehicle was shipped back to Czechoslovakia. Sweden also tried to buy the LTVZ-38 and an agreement was signed for 90 vehicles. In July 1940, these 90 vehicles were simply taken over by the Germans for themselves, but nevertheless, Sweden acquired a production license for this vehicle. Due to problems with the deliveries of armored plates from the suppliers, actual production was unable to start until early 1939. The first series of 10 tanks was actually completed by the time of the German annexation of what was left of Czechoslovakia and the creation of the Protectorate of Bohemia and Moravia and the Slovakian Republic puppet state. With the occupation of former Czechoslovakian territories, the Germans came into possession of the Škoda and ČKD factories. To determine what weapons and armored vehicles could possibly be reused, the German Heereswaffenamt dispatched, in May 1939, a delegation to the ČKD factories. Under German ownership, ČKD would be renamed to BMM. This delegation was led by Lieutenant Colonel Fichtner and Lieutenant Colonel Olbricht. After a quick inspection of vehicles present at the facility, the LTVZ-38 immediately caught the attention of the German delegation. It appears that the LTVZ-38's overall performance highly impressed the Germans who, after an examination, proposed its adoption for army use. For this reason, on 15 May 1939, the working staff of the Armament Office in Prague was formed. Its first decision was to immediately take over the 10 vehicles already produced, which were then given to the 1st Armored Regiment stationed at Milovice. There, these tanks were used for initial training of new instructors that would be needed for later expansion in the numbers of this vehicle. 9 LTVZ-38s would be officially taken over by the Germans on 22nd May 1939, while one vehicle was kept in the factory. While the Heereswaffenamt was initially uninterested and reluctant to adopt foreign weapons and armored vehicles, a practice that would change later in the war, due to a lack of German industrial production capacity, which prevented the Wehrmacht from fielding tanks in greater numbers, the LTVZ-38 was accepted for service. Little did the Germans know at that time that this decision would lead to the emergence of a great number of different types of armored vehicles, based on the LTVZ-38 chassis. The production rate was to be around 25 vehicles per month. Beside the first 10 vehicles, 12 were completed in June, 39 in July, 18 in August, 31 in September, 30 in October, with the last 11 completed in November 1939. Very interesting is the fact that the Germans actually paid ČKD for all these tanks. When the ČKD LTVZ-38 was adopted by the Waffenamt from May to August 1939, these were simply referred to as Czech Panzerkampfwagen III. In August 1939, in German documents, the designation Panzerkampfwagen 3.7 cm LTM-38 began to appear. LTM-38 was an abbreviation which stood for Light Tank Model 1938. While in some sources it stands for Light Tank Munster. In some German documents, the designation Panzer III was also used. In the period between October 1939 to January 1940, the name was once again changed to LTM-38 Protektorat. The name Panzerkampfwagen 38T, by which it is best known today, was officially introduced in mid-January 1940. In addition, its main weapon was also officially designated as 3.7 cm KVK 38T. During the war, as newer models were introduced, the Ausführung denomination ranging from A to S would be added to its name. While during its production run some changes were made, the Panzer 38T's overall construction and design was relatively unchanged from the first version to the last. For this reason, precise identification of the Panzer 38T versions can sometimes be very hard. The Panzer 38T was more or less similar in layout to all other German tanks. It was divided into a few sections which included the forward-mounted transmission, central crew fighting compartment, and, to the rear, the engine compartment. The transmission and steering systems were placed at the front of the hull and were protected with large angled armored plates. To allow better access for repairs, a rectangular-shaped transmission hatch was located in the middle of this plate. It was protected by an extended U-shaped splash ring. The hull and the remaining parts of the Panzer 38T body were constructed using armored plates riveted to an armored frame. The armor plates that needed to be easily removable, like the upper horizontal plate in the hull for access to the gearbox, rear engine plate, etc., were held in place by using bolts. In order to be able to cross rivers up to 1 meter deep, the rivet and bolt joints were waterproofed by adding parchment paper soaked in oil. The superstructure was added atop the Panzer 38T Ausf.A hull to provide protection for the crew members. It had a simple design which consisted of 4 plates and the armored roof plates. While the side and rear armored plates were flat, the front was not. The left part where the machine gun bow mount and the small observation port for the radio operator were located protruded out slightly. This port had a 4mm visor slit that was cut into it, and, for protection against small caliber rounds, a stepped deflector was added. This observation port was protected with a 50mm thick armored glass block. For the radio operator, there was an additional but much smaller observation port to the left side. On the right side, there were 2 observation ports that were used by the driver. These could be protected by using either a 50mm thick armored glass block or a tempered glass windshield. The roof armored plate of the crew compartment was completely flat. Above the radio operator, there was a 2-part hatch door. The Panzer 38T superstructure was not completely gas-proof, and for this reason, 4 gas masks were stowed inside the vehicle. The Panzer 38T Ausf.A had a simple turret design, which was constructed using differently shaped armored plates held together by rivets and bolts. The large one-piece front armor plate was placed at an angle of 9 degrees, and the sides were angled at 10 degrees. The front turret armor plate was connected to the turret frame by using bolts, so that it could be easily removed for maintenance and repair of the main gun. The turret was mounted on a ball bearing race and had a full 360 degrees of traverse. The traverse was achieved by using the traverse handwheel gear. The diameter of this turret ring was 1,210 mm. A commander's cupola was located on the left side of the turret roof. The commander's cupola had 4 observation ports to cover all sides. On top of it was a large one-piece hatch door. A tube-shaped pivoting traversable periscope was mounted in front of the cupola. Unlike later versions of the Panzer 38T, the Ausf.A did not have an armored cover over the top of the periscope. On top of the commander's hatch, there was a smaller round hatch which was used for firing signal flares or using signal flags. Next to the commander's cupola, there was another round-shaped hatch which had the same purpose. The secondary role of these 2 hatches was for ventilation during gun firing. Beside the commander's cupola, no other escape hatch was added to the turret. In addition, there were no observation hatches to the side or to the rear. Due to the Panzer 38T's small size, internal storage space was quite limited. For this reason, additional external storage boxes were needed. These were not added at the production plant, but at army depots prior to their shipment to frontline units. The number, size, and designs of storage boxes varied throughout the production run. On the Ausf.A, a shovel and a pickaxe were placed at the rear. While it was not initially installed, during the production run of the Ausf.A, a no-tech light was added on the left track guard, while on the rear left side a conval tail light would also be added. The suspension consisted of 4 775mm diameter large road wheels with split rubber tires. The use of large diameter road wheels was meant to reduce wear on the rubber tires. These wheels were connected in pairs and were suspended using semi-elliptical leaf springs. In addition, there was a front 19-tooth drive sprocket, a rear idler, and 2 return rollers per side. The track consisted of 94 links. Each track link was 293mm wide and 104mm long. These were connected using link pins which were secured with spring clips. The ground clearance of these vehicles was 40 centimeters. The upper part of the tracks was covered by a track guard which was 2mm thick. The track guard was also slightly angled to the outside to serve as a rainwater drain. The Panzer 38T was powered by a Praga TN-HPS-2 6-cylinder gasoline engine giving out 125 horsepower at 2,200 RPM. This was actually a license-produced variant of the Swedish Scania Vabis Type 1664. The maximum speed for the vehicle was 42 km per hour or 17 km cross-country, with an operational range of 220 to 250 km and 100 km cross-country. The fuel load of 220 liters was stored in 2 fuel tanks placed under the engine and protected by an armored plate. The Panzer III engine cooling system consisted of 1 radiator and a large cooling fan, both of which were placed to the rear of the engine compartment. Engine temperature could be regulated from the crew compartment. This engine provided the best performance when the temperature was between 80 to 85 degrees Celsius. Air intakes were placed above the engine and were protected from enemy fire with armored plates. The engine could be started using a 2.5 kW scintilla type starter, or simply by using the hand crank. The engine and the crew compartment was separated by a fire-resistant and gas-tight armored firewall. This firewall was 5 mm thick and consisted of 2 mm of steel, 2 mm of asbestos, and 1 mm of aluminum plates. It served to protect the crew from the engine heat and any possible outbreaks of fire in the engine bay. The crew had 2 small rectangular hatch doors placed in the firewall in order to have access to the engine compartment if needed. The Praga-Wilson CVT-NHP 4-speed gearbox was connected to the engine by a drive shaft that ran through the bottom of the crew fighting compartment. The driver could change the gear simply by using a selector and then engaging the clutch foot pedal. The driver steered the tank by using a clutch brake steering, which had 2 steering brake drums and 2 bypass drive brakes. When the driver used the bypass driver brake, the Panzer III turning radius was 9 meters. To lower this radius to less than 9 meters, the driver released the steering clutch and then engaged the steering brakes. The front glacis was 12 mm thick at a 75-degree angle. The whole front was 25 mm at a 15-degree angle, and the lower hull front was 15 mm thick with a 66-degree angle. The side armor was 15 mm thick, the rear was 10 to 15 mm, and the bottom was 8. The front superstructure armor was 25 mm placed at a 17.6-degree angle. The sides of the crew compartment were 15 mm placed vertically. The engine compartment was protected by 10 mm thick armor at a 35-degree angle. The front turret armor was 25 mm, while the sides and rear were 15, and the top was 8 mm. The commander's cupola had all round 15 mm of armor, with the hatch door being 8 mm thick. The Panzer III Ausf.A, similar to the other German tanks of the time, was equipped with the smoke grenade rack system. This device was placed on the rear of the hull. This rack, covered with an armored shield, contained 5 grenades which were activated with the wire system by the Panzer III commander. When activated, the Panzer would then drive backward to the safety of the smokescreen. Czechoslovak designers originally planned for this vehicle to have 3 crew members. In this scenario, the commander would be the only one to stay in the turret. He would simply be overburdened with the many tasks that he would have to perform, like operating and loading the gun. As this thinking was obsolete by German standards, the greatest change to this vehicle was adding the 4th crew member. While the latest German tanks used innovative 5-man crew configurations, due to the Panzer III's small size, this was not possible. In German hands, the Panzer III was operated by a crew of 4, which consisted of the commander/gunner and the loader, who were positioned in the turret, and the driver and radio operator in the hull. The commander was positioned on the left side of the turret. In order to have better awareness of the surroundings, he was provided with a cupola. Due to the turret's small size and the impossibility of adding a 5th crew member, the commander had to act as the gunner too. The loader was positioned next to the commander. The loader also operated the turret machine gun. In the hull on the left side was the radio operator, and next to him to the right was the driver. The commander had 2 options to communicate with the driver, either through an intercom system or by signal lights. The main armament of the Panzer III Ausf.A was the 3.7 cm H7 L48.7 Škoda gun, which, in German hands, was renamed to KWK-38T. With the acquisition of Czechoslovakian factories, the Germans also claimed possession of stockpiles of 3.7 cm ammunition. The original Czechoslovakian 3.7cm rounds had a weight of 850 grams and, with a muzzle velocity of 741 meters per second, the armor penetration was 28mm of armor at a 30-degree angle at 600 meters. This type of ammunition had some issues, especially with the large cloud of smoke that accumulated after the gun was fired, which made forward observation difficult. Another issue was the lack of tracers. To resolve these problems, the Germans improved its performance by adding a tracer, increasing weight by adding a larger explosive charge, and adding a new cap in order to increase its aerodynamic performance. This new round had a muzzle velocity of 750 meters per second and could penetrate 41mm at a 30-degree angle at 600 meters and 27mm at 1 kilometer. Beside the armor-piercing rounds, there was also a high-explosive and a tungsten cored round. The tungsten core ammunition was available from early 1941 onwards. It was known as the 3.7cm Panzergranate 40-37T, and with a muzzle velocity of 1020 meters per second, could penetrate 64mm of armor at ranges of 100 meters at a 30-degree angle. In German pamphlets that were issued to the frontline troops in the summer of 1941, this ammunition type is listed as being able to penetrate the T-34's hull-side armor from ranges of up to 300 meters. Tungsten was in short supply in Germany, so the use of this ammunition was rare. The rate of fire for this gun was around 15 rounds per minute. The ammunition load for the main gun was 90 rounds, which was stored in 15 ammunition magazines with 6 rounds each. Elevation of the gun ranged from -10 to +25 degrees. The gun used a Turmziel-Fernrohr 38T telescopic sight, which had a 2.6 magnification and a 25-degree field of view. If this sight was not operational, there was an optional second open sight. The back of the gun was provided with an armored recoil shield to avoid accidental injury during gun firing. Underneath this protective shield, a canvas bag was added to hold 15 to 20 spent cartridges. During the firing of the main gun, the spent propellant fumes were ejected by the engine cooling air system through a vent slit which was located on the superstructure left side, or even through the observation ports. When on the move and not in combat, the turret could be locked down in place. The secondary armament consisted of two 7.92mm ZBVZ-37 machine guns. These machine guns were renamed by the Germans as MG37T. The first ball-mounted machine gun was positioned in the superstructure and was operated by the radio operator. It had a 28-degree traverse with an elevation of -10 to +10 degrees. The elevation was limited in order to avoid hitting the main gun by accident and potentially damaging it. For aiming this machine gun, a telescopic sight with a 2.6 magnification was provided. There was also an option for the driver to fire the machine gun by activating a trigger placed on the left steering lever. In this case, the machine gun would be fixed and aimed by moving the whole vehicle. The second ball-mounted machine gun was placed to the right of the main gun. Interestingly, there were two options for how this machine gun could be operated. First was the standard coaxial link to the main gun. The second option was to use the machine gun completely independently by removing a connection pin. In this case, the machine gun had 28 degrees of traverse with an elevation of -10 to +25 degrees. The total ammunition load for the two machine guns was 2,700 rounds. The Germans added one MP-38 or MP-40 submachine gun with 256 rounds of ammunition. Beside the gun and machine gun ammunition, some 24 rounds for a signal flare pistol was also carried inside. On some Ausf.A vehicles, a blocking mechanism was added to the turret machine gun to prevent it from hitting the main gun. That's all for this video. Make sure to follow our website, we'll be releasing new articles on the regular. You can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, or Reddit, and if you use Discord, there's a link to our community server in the description. Also, likes, comments, and subscriptions on YouTube are greatly appreciated. If you would like to help us continue to develop and expand, also consider donating on Patreon or PayPal. All of the funds will be used to help us enhance and design new articles and features for you. Until next time, keep us in your sights.